Near to where the line from the big engine shed joins the main line, there are some special points. They are called trap points, and the rails don't go anywhere, but are just long enough to derail anything running away and prevent it from colliding with engines on the main line. Henry could never understand why they were there. "Useless things," he grumbled. "They can take them away as soon as they like." "Run away indeed! Why should we want to run away from our nice warm shed? Tell me that." Neither Gordon nor James could, so they didn't bother to try. One night, Henry was alone in the shed. This was unusual, but Gordon was not due back until early in the morning, and James had been delayed by the other railway. Oliver, Donald and Douglas, along with Duck, were all busy at the other end of Duck and Oliver's branch line. It was a cold night, and Henry felt lonely. He was glad when the firelighter came earlier than usual. Gratefully, Henry felt warmth spread through his boiler. He was drowsy and comfortable. "Running away," he thought to himself as he dozed. "Who'd be daft enough to do that on a cold morning like this?" Suddenly, he awoke. Someone was climbing the steps to his cab. It was the firelighter, who thought it would be fun, while no one was about, to drive an engine. He unwound the brake and moved the regulator, but nothing happened. Disappointed, the firelighter went away, without closing the regulator. Henry dozed again. When he next awoke, he could see that it was just getting light outside. Then he realised what had woken him. Steam was trickling into his cylinders. "It's too early," he thought. "Driver can't be here yet." Henry felt himself moving. He tried to stop, but he couldn't without his driver and fireman. He tried to whistle. He couldn't do that either. He neared the shed door. It hadn't been built to stop engines. Henry wished it had. "Ooh, ouch!" he exclaimed as he demolished it. It was cold and frosty outside. "Help!" thought Henry as he rumbled along. "I don't like this." But there was nothing he could do about it. Then he remembered the main line. "Horrors," he thought. "I hope nothing's coming." A green signal light and the sound of an engine approaching told him that something was coming. "Help!" thought Henry again. He shut his eyes and waited for the crash. He was just a few inches clear of Gordon's coaches, as, with a whistle, a rattle and a roar, the big blue engine thundered by. "Phew! That was a near miss," hissed Henry, as men shouted and began to run towards him. "Thank you, trap points. You can stay there just as long as you like."
James was feeling sorry for himself. "I'm getting old," he grumbled to the other engines one morning. "I can't get about like I used to. It's alright for you younger ones, but my wheels are getting stiff." Edward, Gordon and Henry had all been on the Fat Controller's Railway for much longer than James, but they didn't say so. At last, Henry got tired of James's complaining. "Poor old groaner," he said. "It's no use you just sitting there and moaning. Why don't you tell the Fat Controller that you're past it?" James didn't like that idea. Not all old engines, so he had heard, were preserved. Some, they said, were sold for scrap. "Best not," he said nervously, shuddering a little at the thought. The night goods left the big station at midnight. Usually one of the Fat Controller's diesels pulled it, but one was the way and the other was being mended. James had to take it instead and grumbled dreadfully about it. "All this extra shunting," he snorted indignantly. "It's too much for an old engine like me." A few days later, an inspector came to the shed. "People who live near the yard are complaining," he said. "They said there's a sort of groaning noise that's been keeping them awake at night." I don't remember hearing anything, said James's driver. We were there until midnight. That's right, agreed the inspector. That's when they say it stopped. It's probably only James moaning and groaning about his extra shunting, suggested Henry cheekily. Shut up, retorted James. If you had the shunt at night, you'd moan and groan louder than anyone. That night, James's driver and fireman listened carefully. It is you, James, they said at last. Your brake blocks aren't holding your wheels properly, and when they rub against each other, they make a groaning sound. Oh dear, said James mournfully. The Fat Controller acted at once. I can't have complaints about my railway, he ordered. Donald and Douglas shall take turns on the midnight goods until the diesels return. James must have his brakes seen to at once. James was pleased not to have to pull the midnight goods, and even happier at not having to shunt in the night. But even though his brakes were mended, the nickname Old Groaner stuck for several weeks afterwards.
Thomas loves working on his branch, and he's never lonely there. He has Percy to look after the trucks, Toby and Mavis to run the quarry, and of course he has Annie and Clarabelle to keep him in order. But it was not always like that. A long time ago, Thomas used to run this line on his own. The only company that he had were the other engines that he would meet at the junction. This story takes place not long after Percy had arrived on Sodor. On that day, Thomas was waiting to collect passengers from Bertie. While he was waiting, Percy arrived with some empty trucks. He had been working very hard in the yard, and was looking forward to a rest. "It's lovely out here in the country, Thomas," he yawned. "Oh, it's so quiet and pretty. You're very lucky to work out here." "I know I am," said Thomas. "I wish I had my own branch line," said Percy. And he yawned again. "It would be a dream come true for me. How did you get your line?" "Well," said Thomas, "it wasn't easy. When I first arrived, I started out shunting in the yard, like you, pushing and pulling coaches and trucks all day long. It was fun at first, but after a while I wasn't happy doing the same jobs all the time. I wanted to see a bit of the world. My first challenge didn't go so well. When Henry was ill, I offered to pull his passenger train, but I was so excited I started before they could couple me up, and I left the coaches behind. Another time, I offered to take Edward's goods train, but the silly trucks pushed me down the hill, and I nearly crashed through the buffers." Percy gave a huge yawn. "Anyway," went on Thomas, "one day those trucks caused trouble for poor James. They pushed him so hard that he went right off the line. Luckily I was nearby, because I had the important job of taking the breakdown train to help him. Oh, I made myself very useful that day. I worked really hard, pushing the unhurt trucks out of the way, and then clearing away the broken ones. Then, when the men had repaired the line, and the cranes had lifted James back on the rails, my next job was to help James back to the shed. He was in a bad way, and pulling a big engine like him really tired me out. But I never complained once. I was only happy to help. I had proved that I was a really useful engine, and the Fat Controller was very pleased with me. As a reward, he gave me my own branch line. as well as Annie and Clarabelle. Thomas paused. He had enjoyed telling Percy his story. So there you are, Percy. That's how I got my branch line. And who knows? If you work hard and make yourself really useful, perhaps the Fat Controller might give you your own branch line one day. Percy? Percy! But Percy didn't reply. He was so tired he had fallen fast asleep.